Have you ever found yourself in the middle of a completely exhausting, heated argument?
Oh, yeah. Way too many times.
Right. And you're just intensely defending this idea. And then maybe hours or even days later, you suddenly realize, wait, I barely even thought about that specific idea a week ago.
It's such a weird realization. Like, where did this even come from?
Exactly. Or, maybe you've looked around at the world lately and wondered why certain wild narratives seem to spread like an absolute wildfire.
Well, actual facts they just bounce harmlessly right off people's foreheads.
Yeah, it's wild. And the terrifying thing we're looking at today is that you didn't choose that idea. It actually infected you.
Which is a pretty heavy concept to wrap your head around.
It really is. So today we're doing a deep dive into the terrifying mechanics of what's called cognitive virology.
Yeah, we're looking at a really fascinating lecture by Chase Hughes.
Right. It's from his YouTube channel, and the lecture is titled Cognitive Virology Mass Infection. And our mission for this deep dive is to understand this mind-bending premise.
Which is basically how ideas and language literally act exactly like biological viruses.
Exactly. We're going to break down how they infect our minds, how they, completely bypass our mental security systems.
And how they hijack our behavior to ultimately spread through society.
Yeah. And I want to set the stage right out of the gate for you listening at home. We aren't just talking about viral internet cat photos here.
No, definitely not. Or like a funny dance trend on TikTok.
Right. We are talking about the invisible architecture of your most deeply held beliefs.
Yeah.
Politics, culture, all of it.
Yeah, and to really grasp what's happening beneath the surface here, we have to kind of completely shatter and rebuild our analytical framework.
Okay, so where do we start with that?
Well, when we look at the ideas swirling around us, we instinctively want to categorize them, right? Like morally or factually.
Yeah, we ask, is this true or is this a good idea?
Exactly. But we need to stop asking if an idea is good or if it is true. That's the old paradigm.
And it's blinding us.
Right. It completely blinds us to how information actually moves. We have to start asking if an idea is fit for survival. We're looking strictly at the mechanics of contagion.
Okay, let's unpack this foundational concept because it really does flip your worldview upside down. The core premise starts with a principle straight from biology.
Right, the idea that nothing in life moves as a whole entity.
Exactly. Everything in biology moves as tiny, discrete units of information. In biology, we call those units genes.
Yeah, and they're really just little packets of instructions.
Right. And the ones that replicate the best, the ones that are most fit for their environment, are the ones that survive and propagate.
But then the lecture makes this incredible pivot. It argues that human culture works identically.
Yeah, identically. So in culture, these units of information are called memes. And I know what you're thinking.
Yeah, erase the image of text overlaid on a picture of a confused dog.
Exactly. A meme, in this scientific evolutionary context, is a catchphrase, or a religious belief, a political narrative.
Even a set of unspoken rules in your family dynamic.
Right. What's fascinating here is that these memes obey the exact same ruthless laws of natural selection as biological genes.
Yeah, and natural selection, whether it's biological or cultural, is completely devoid of morality. It's ruthlessly pragmatic.
Think about a biological gene, right? A gene doesn't care if it gives you terrible eyesight or a bad back.
Not at all. As long as you live long enough to reproduce and pass it on, it wins.
Exactly. Similarly, a cultural meme does not care about your emotional well-being. It doesn't care about societal harmony.
It doesn't even care about the objective truth, which is the scariest part. Hughes points out this chilling reality.
Yeah, tell them about the truth part, because that stuck with me.
He says that even if an idea is profoundly beautiful, or even if knowing the absolute truth would literally save your life, truth is absolutely optional in this ecosystem.
Optional.
Right. The only thing that is not optional is replication. The idea's singular driving goal is to get copied and move from your mind into someone else's mind.
I love the visual of a garden for this. Think of the human mind as this really lush, fertile garden.
Okay. Yeah.
And these memes are just countless seeds constantly blowing in the wind, landing in your soil. But they aren't all beautiful, beneficial flowers. Some of them are incredibly aggressive weeds.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
And if a weed has a root system that is simply better at taking hold, and if it's better at spreading its seeds than the flower, well, the weed will absolutely take over the garden.
It fundamentally doesn't matter that the flower is prettier or provides better nutrients. The weed wins the replication game.
Exactly. I want you, the listener, to think about the voice in your head right now. Reflect on the ideological beliefs you hold most dearly.
This is the uncomfortable part.
Very uncomfortable. The truth presented here is that most of the ideas you think you believe, you didn't consciously choose.
No, you didn't sit down in a quiet room, weigh all the evidence, and logically debate your way into holding them.
Right. They blew into your garden, found fertile ground, and they replicated inside you.
It is a profound, almost destabilizing shift in perspective. You are not necessarily the author of your beliefs.
You're just the host.
You're merely the host. And once you begin to view human interaction through that specific lens, so much baffling behavior suddenly starts to make sense.
Oh, for sure. Like why people will burn down their lifelong friendships.
Or sabotage their own promising careers.
Yeah. Or completely fragment their families over some abstract idea. Why would a rational creature do that?
Because the virus doesn't care if the host suffers.
Exactly. If the host burns their entire life to the ground, but manages to aggressively spread the virus to, say, 3 other people through their outrage,
The virus considers that a massive evolutionary victory.
it's so dark. Which brings up a massive, glaring question. If these ideas are just mindless packets of information blindly trying to survive, how did they become so incredibly dangerous and polarizing in the modern world?
Right. Because we've had ideas forever.
Yeah, human beings have been communicating, trading stories around campfires for hundreds of thousands of years. What changed to make these viruses so potent today?
What changed is the environment. You have to look at the ecosystem in which these ideas are spreading.
Okay, so the evolution of contagion. Walk us through that.
Well, for almost the entirety of human history, ideas spread what evolutionary biologists would call vertically.
Meaning from parents to children.
Exactly. Passed down from the elders of a small tribe down to the younger generation.
And that vertical transmission acts as a bottleneck, right?
Very natural, very effective bottleneck. It's slow. And crucially, if a cultural meme is so toxic that it gets the tribe killed by predators or starvation.
The idea literally dies with them.
Exactly. So over thousands of years, vertical transmission naturally selected for ideas that generally kept the host alive and promoted cooperation.
But now, in the span of just a few decades, that vertical bottleneck has been completely obliterated.
Completely. Today, ideas don't have to wait a generation to spread, they spread horizontally.
Yeah, across massive peer networks across the entire globe instantaneously.
And at zero marginal cost. We have unwittingly created a radically new, hyper-connected environment for these cultural genes.
And he specifically points to social media algorithms as the catalyst here. They supercharged this whole mechanism.
Yeah, they really did.
And we need to be clear about how this works. The algorithms aren't just neutral, passive pipes carrying information. They act as a highly unnatural environment that artificially selects for the most aggressive viruses.
Right. Because think about how an algorithm works. Its only goal is to keep your eyes on the screen to serve you ads.
Right. So it amplifies whatever engages you, whatever replicates the best.
And the lecture lays out the ironclad rules of modern replication in this environment. Emotion will always beat accuracy.
Outrage will always beat nuance.
And absolute certainty will always beat humility.
If we connect this to the broader picture, the modern digital algorithm is essentially a global petri dish optimized for maximum virulence.
That's exactly what it is. Because think about what nuance and humility require from a human being.
They require cognitive effort.
Yeah, they require pausing, reflecting, and admitting you might be wrong. In viral terms, that slows down the transmission rate significantly.
Right. Nobody goes viral by saying, well, it's complicated and I need to read more about it.
Exactly. But outrage, absolute, rigid certainty, they demand immediate action.
They spike your adrenaline and cortisol.
They demand to be shared right this second so you can warn your tribe or attack the enemy. The algorithm measures that immediate action, interprets it as high engagement, and pushes the virus to a million more feeds.
Okay, I hear you. And the evolutionary argument is incredibly elegant, but I have to push back on this a little.
Sure, go for it.
Because I think this is where a lot of people, myself included, might feel a bit of intellectual friction. Look, if you show me a math equation, my brain processes it logically. If someone presents me with a verified, peer-reviewed study that directly contradicts a viral internet meme, my logic circuits have to engage, right? I have a fully functioning prefrontal cortex.
You do.
I don't just regress to a caveman because I saw a provocative post. Shouldn't our logic and our access to all of human knowledge act as a firewall against this stuff?
You would certainly hope so. And that is the flattering illusion of the modern mind.
The flattering illusion. I like that.
We like to think our prefrontal cortex, the logical, analytical part of our brain, is always sitting behind the steering wheel.
But it's not.
But cognitive viruses don't knock on the CEO's door. They bypass that logical firewall entirely.
Wow.
You have to remember that logic is a relatively new evolutionary development, and it is incredibly expensive in terms of caloric brain energy.
So our brains are basically lazy.
Efficient, let's call it efficient. When faced with a massive influx of information, the brain looks for shortcuts. These viruses hijack the ancient machinery built deep into our nervous systems long before logic existed.
They go straight for the amygdala.
Exactly, your primitive reptilian alarm system. We are, at our core, a tribal species. We have a profound, ancient survival need for social belonging, for clear authority, for certainty in a dangerous world.
And for moral outrage.
Right, which historically kept the tribe in line and expelled freeloaders. The virus simply binds to those ancient emotional receptors. It doesn't need to outsmart your logic.
It just needs to make you feel threatened or validated.
Yes. Once the amygdala is fired up, the prefrontal cortex is essentially locked in the trunk of the car.
Locked in the trunk. That is terrifyingly efficient. So the question is, how does this hijacking actually play out in real time?
To understand the exact mechanics, the lecture breaks down the anatomy of a cognitive infection into a 5-step loop.
Right. This is the core blueprint. And if even one of these steps fails, the idea dies and gets forgotten.
But if all 5 succeed, the idea completely owns the human host.
Okay, let's list the steps. They are attach, enter, replicate, defend, and transmit. Let's break down the first 2, which are all about breaching the perimeter. Stage 1, attach, and stage 2, enter.
So stage 1 is attach. Just like a biological virus, say. The flu physically needs very specific protein receptor on a human cell to grab onto before it can do anything.
A cognitive virus needs a receptor in the human mind.
Precisely. It has to bind to pre-existing emotional circuitry. The virus doesn't usually create the emotion from scratch. It scans the environment and finds what is already simmering under the surface.
So it looks for fear or a lingering sense of threat.
Or a deep desire for social belonging, status anxiety, or basic relief-seeking behavior when someone is exhausted.
And if the host's mind doesn't recognize the emotion immediately.
The receptor is closed, and the virus cannot attach.
Hughes gives some brilliant, everyday examples of what this attachment language actually sounds like in the real world.
Yeah, it's the language that makes you feel deeply seen and understood.
Right, like in copywriting or targeted sales, you might hear a pitch start with, "If you've ever felt overlooked in your career." Or, "Most people struggle silently with this exact same thing."
The relief you feel hearing that, oh, it's not just me feeling that, is the attachment.
Exactly. Or in parenting, a mom or dad might look at a screaming toddler and say, "I know that you really wanted to do the right thing just now, and I know this feels completely unfair."
Validating the unfairness is the attachment point.
It's so simple but so effective. He also gives an example in leadership. A manager trying to steer a burned-out team might start a meeting with, "Look, I realize everybody in this room is completely exhausted, and what we're going through right now feels incredibly uncertain."
Because if you don't provide that attachment, there's no entry. The brilliant strategic idea you have just bounces off their foreheads.
And this highlights where most people get the concept of persuasion entirely wrong.
Oh, completely. We think persuasion is about standing at a podium and presenting a flawless, geometrically perfect, logical argument.
But if you haven't attached to an underlying emotional receptor first, your logic literally does not matter. The audience cannot hear it.
You have to meet the host exactly where their nervous system is currently residing. If they are in fear, you must attach to the fear before you can lead them to logic.
Okay, so the idea has successfully attached. It has found the open emotional receptor. Now it rapidly moves to stage 2, enter.
Right. The idea has to get past the brain's natural skepticism and resistance.
But it has to do it quietly, without triggering your critical evaluation. This is where Hughes makes a fascinating point that really stuck with me.
About active persuasion.
Yes. He says if the listener feels like they are being actively persuaded, the entry fails. The moment your brain thinks, "This person is trying to sell me something," or "This article is trying to change my politics," the shields go up.
If the idea invites any debate at the front door, it fails to enter.
So how does it get in?
This is exactly where the virus deploys mental shortcuts. Our brains simply cannot process every piece of data we encounter. We would be paralyzed.
So we rely on heuristics.
Exactly. Heuristics are basically mental shortcuts designed to save time and energy. The entering virus cloaks itself in these heuristics.
So you hear phrases like experts agree or everyone is starting to see this.
Or the classic scarcity trigger. This is being actively suppressed.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Think of stage 2 as a classic Trojan horse.
Okay, I like that analogy.
But instead of hiding Greek soldiers inside a wooden horse, the virus is hiding an ideological payload inside a shortcut.
Right.
The language being used, all the top experts agree, or they don't want you to see this video, it doesn't actually convince the guards at the gate of your mind that the facts are true. It completely bypasses the guards.
It pre-approves the message.
Yes. The guards aren't looking for facts. They're looking for social consensus or authority. So when the virus wears a badge that says, hey, the whole tribe already believes this, the guards just shrug and open the heavy wooden gates.
Conscious reasoning hasn't even booted up yet, but you are already being subconsciously asked to agree based entirely on social proof, authority, or artificial scarcity.
It's sneaky. The heuristic shortcut manually disables the cognitive alarm system.
You don't rigorously evaluate the claim because the shortcut essentially whispers to your brain, hey, relax, the group has already done the hard work of evaluating this, it's safe to let in.
Or in the case of scarcity, this information is rare and forbidden. Grab it before it's deleted.
Right. The entry phase is purely about moving the ideological payload inside the walls of the city without waking up your prefrontal cortex.
So the idea has successfully bypassed the guards. It is officially inside the mind. What does it do next?
Well, it doesn't just sit there.
No, it sets up a factory. This brings us to stages 3 and 4 of the infection cycle. Replicate and defend. And this is where the process gets incredibly dark.
Very dark. Stage 3, replicate, is where the cognitive virus really takes over the host's internal processing power.
This is the moment when the idea begins to generate new thoughts autonomously, right? All by itself.
Think of it like malicious code running in the background of your computer. You no longer need the person who originally infected you to be in the room. The idea is now doing the thinking for you day and night.
Hughes explains that during this replication phase, the viral idea executes a few very specific, highly effective programs. First, it goes back into your memory archives and starts explaining your past experiences without you even prompting it to.
It reframes your entire history through its new lens.
Yes. Then, it projects forward and convincingly predicts your future outcomes. And crucially, it compresses massive, nuanced, agonizing complexity into a single, aggressively simple frame.
Suddenly, it feels like this idea is connecting 100 random dots that were just floating around in your head.
And you get this massive dopamine hit of sudden clarity.
Hughes uses a really funny but disturbingly accurate example of joining a cult to illustrate this.
Oh, the cult example. Walk us through that.
Let's trace the hypothetical guy. Let's call him Bob. Bob's life is a mess. His career is stalled. His relationships keep failing. He feels alienated. Then Bob joins a brand new cult.
Okay, poor Bob.
Instantly, the viral idea of the cult goes to work on Bob's past. The idea whispers to him, the reason you never succeeded in life before isn't because of incredibly complex socioeconomic factors or bad luck or your own poor personal choices. No, it's simply because you didn't know the secret alien technique to communicate with the mothership in Alpha Centauri. Boom. The chaotic past is perfectly neatly explained. The agonizing complexity of Bob's life failures is instantly compressed into a single, incredibly comfortable narrative.
It's a masterstroke. The virus hands Bob a prepackaged set of villains who are holding him down and a profound sense of belonging to the enlightened few at the exact same time.
It is doing all the heavy cognitive lifting so Bob doesn't have to.
But once an idea is entrenched in there, generating all these comforting thoughts, it needs to ensure it doesn't get evicted when reality inevitably pushes back.
Which it always does.
Right. Which brings us to stage 4, defend. The idea literally constructs a psychological immune system around itself.
And if we step back and connect this to the bigger picture of human psychology, this is perhaps the most insidious, brilliant step in the entire cycle.
How so?
Well, when we try to change someone's mind, say we're trying to pull Bob out of his cult, we operate on the assumption that if we just introduce enough logical doubt, the bad idea will eventually collapse under the weight of reality.
Right, we think facts will cure them.
Exactly. But a fully evolved viral idea anticipates doubt. It expects to be challenged. So it reframes doubt in advance.
So the doubt is never actually removed.
No, it is structurally reinterpreted as evidence that the idea is true.
Hughes uses a much more relatable everyday example here, which I liked. A parent trying to install a new behavioral rule in the house, like telling a kid they can no longer eat Fruit Loops 6 times a day.
A very necessary rule.
Very necessary. But as the parent trying to install this new meme, you are going to face massive skepticism, doubt, and loud contradiction from the kid.
Yep.
But if you're installing an idea effectively, or more to the point, if a virus is installing itself in you, it utilizes that resistance.
Let's go back to Bob in the cult to see how that works. If someone from the outside world says to Bob, "Hey man, I read an article, your leader is a total fraud with a criminal record," the cult's immune system immediately triggers.
It tells Bob, "We told you the unenlightened outsiders would try to tear us down."
Exactly. The fact that they are attacking us with fake news is absolute proof that we possess the sacred truth. Arguing with an infected person literally becomes high-octane fuel for the viral idea.
I really want to pause here and make sure we are all fully absorbing this, because this is the part that genuinely breaks my brain.
That's a lot to take in.
You're saying that our own critical thinking, our own natural skepticism, the very thing we rely on to protect us from bad ideas, is actually hijacked and inverted to protect the virus?
Precisely. The virus weaponizes your own defense mechanisms against you. If you, or an outside source, try to pull the viral idea out, the host's mind interprets that extraction attempt, not as a friendly debate, but as a literal physical attack on its core operating system.
Have you ever wondered why presenting undeniable, verified facts to someone heavily infected with a conspiracy theory just makes them dig their heels in deeper?
Psychologists call it the backfire effect.
But in virology terms, the contradiction just makes the narrative stronger. The virus provides a psychological painkiller for the cognitive dissonance of being wrong.
It has trained the host to eat doubt, metabolize it, and shoot it back out as even stronger, more aggressive conviction.
The sinister efficiency of this mechanism is just staggering. The virus wraps itself in your identity so tightly that questioning the idea feels like a mortal threat to your psychological survival.
Exactly.
Okay, so the virus is safely entrenched behind the walls, it's autonomously replicating thoughts, and it's perfectly defended against logic, facts, and external doubt. The final step is to break out of the host and find fresh minds to infect.
Stage 5. Transmit.
Right. For any virus to survive long-term, it must eventually leave the host and jump to another person.
And the mechanism the cognitive virus uses for transmission is deeply, intrinsically tied to human identity.
We have to ask ourselves, why do we share ideas? We don't just share them to pass along neutral, objective information to our peers.
No, we share them because of what the act of sharing does for us. We share them because it makes us feel smart. It makes us feel compassionate. It gives us a vital role to play in our social circle.
Hughes states a very clear, hard rule about transmission. If an idea upgrades your identity, it will spread incredibly fast.
And it usually accomplishes this by anchoring you to a moral high ground.
Right. The idea makes you feel enlightened or awake or good or on the right side of history.
And notice how brilliantly that hooks right back into the ancient evolutionary machinery we discussed at the very beginning.
Belonging to the tribe.
Exactly. Sharing the idea signals to your tribe that you are a highly valuable, highly moral member of the group. It protects and elevates your social status.
The very moment you find yourself explaining that viral idea to another person, feeling that warm, intoxicating rush of moral superiority or intellectual rightness.
The 5-step loop is fully complete. You have ceased to be just a host. You have become an active vector.
I want to ask you, the listener, to do a really uncomfortable thought experiment right now. Think about the last time you eagerly shared a news story, or a politically charged meme, or a hot take on social media.
Be ruthlessly honest with yourself.
Yes, ruthlessly honest. Did you share it purely to inform people of a dry, neutral fact? Or did you share it because of how it made you look to your peers?
Did it give you a little hit of an identity upgrade?
Did it show your in-group that you're one of the good ones? Because if it did, you weren't just participating in discourse, you were executing stage 5 of the viral loop.
It's a deeply sobering self-reflection. When we look at our behavior through this lens, we realize we are frequently acting as unpaid, highly motivated PR agents for ideas that fundamentally do not care about us.
Exactly. Now, to see this entire 5-step loop operating at a massive, terrifying global scale, we have to look at one of the most intense, pressurized events in recent human history.
We are going to look at the case study of the pandemic information war.
Yes. Now, before we dive into this analysis, I need to make a very crucial, Very explicit disclaimer for everyone listening.
This is really important.
The source material uses the COVID-19 pandemic as its primary overarching example of cognitive virology in action. For the purposes of this deep dive, we are strictly analyzing Hughes's breakdown of how information and narratives behaved mechanically during that time.
Right, we are entirely impartial here.
Entirely. We are not taking a stance on the politics, the virology, the medical realities, or the government policies of the pandemic. We are not endorsing the political views of the source material.
Our sole mission today is to look at how the source maps the 5-step viral loop onto the psychological behavior of both the political left and the political right.
That is an essential boundary to set because the topic itself is still so emotionally charged, which ironically proves the point of the lecture.
Oh, absolutely. Hughes argues that regardless of the undeniable medical reality, hospitals were indeed slammed, the physical virus was real, and people tragically died. The way the information about it was handled, amplified, and weaponized behaved exactly like a cognitive virus.
He refers to the entire informational ecosystem of that era as a massive psychological operation driven relentlessly by this viral loop. Let's look at how he applies the steps, starting with attachment.
So stage 1, attach. Hughes calls the onset of the pandemic the perfect storm of pre-existing emotion. The cognitive virus didn't even need to work hard to invent an emotion to attach to.
The emotion was already screaming at maximum volume in almost every human being on Earth.
You had the profound primal fear of an invisible, deadly killer.
You had vanishing jobs, triggering intense economic terror.
Kids were locked inside, disrupting the family unit. And crucially, human relief-seeking behavior was cranked up to an 11.
Everyone, everywhere, was utterly desperate for a way to make the anxiety stop. The emotional receptor wasn't just open, it was desperately grabbing at anything that walked by.
Which perfectly sets the stage for stage 2. Enter the bypass of critical resistance.
How did massive, sweeping ideas and policies enter the public consciousness with very little initial debate?
Through the mental heuristics and shortcuts we discussed earlier, the primary shortcut was authority. Trust the experts. Follow the science.
Hughes points out the intense moral framing that acted as a Trojan horse. Good, decent people protect the vulnerable. Who wants to argue against being a good person?
Nobody. And he also highlights the geopolitical shortcuts happening in the background. The lecture mentions reports of the Pentagon running covert anti-China vaccine disinformation using fake social media accounts.
While simultaneously, China was running counter-operations calling the virus a U.S. military bioweapon.
Both geopolitical sides were intentionally seeding doubt about the other to close ranks, while pushing absolute, unquestioning compliance within their own borders.
The shortcuts bypassed the guards everywhere. The entry felt entirely inevitable. As Hughes says, the overwhelming messaging was, this is the definitive science. There is absolutely no room for debate.
Which meant, functionally, that questioning the prevailing narrative immediately got you labeled as socially dangerous.
And from an evolutionary standpoint, being labeled a Granger to the tribe suppresses your social immune system. It makes you exponentially more likely to just adopt the prevailing idea simply to survive socially and not be cast out into the cold.
Once the ideas were safely inside the public mind, we hit stage 3, replicate. The idea starts doing the thinking for the host.
Hughes notes how a messy, incredibly complex, and highly nuanced novel biological virus was rapidly compressed into a simple cognitive binary.
You're either entirely safe or you are entirely unsafe.
There was no gray area permitted. The idea autonomously reframed the past. Suddenly, a random minor cough you had 8 months ago was reinterpreted by your brain as, oh my god, I probably had it back then, this predicts doom.
The idea was running 204/7 in people's heads. It explained the terrifying sight of empty grocery store shelves. It confidently predicted the next catastrophic wave.
People were literally having stress nightmares based on speculative Reddit threads about new variants. The cognitive virus didn't need the cable news anchors anymore.
No, it had set up a factory, generating the fear internally within millions of individual hosts.
And then the defenses went up. Stage 4, defend. This is where Hughes argues we saw master-level cognitive defense mechanisms deployed across society.
Doubt wasn't just quietly suppressed, it was actively eaten, metabolized, and weaponized.
Yes. Hughes breaks down how symmetrically this worked on all sides of the political spectrum. If you showed even mild hesitancy about a policy, the viral defense mechanism immediately labeled you as literally killing someone's grandmother.
On the flip side, if you were heavily skeptical of the policies and thought they were an overreach, the opposing viral defense labeled anyone following the rules as a brainwashed sheep.
If you pointed out government overreach, the defense was, It's a temporary, necessary sacrifice for the greater good.
Even resistance itself proved the threat protesting the lockdown rules was seen as physically spreading the literal virus, which in turn justified even stricter rules.
The ideological immune system was flawless. Doubt was eaten and shot back out as an aggressive demand for more compliance from the in-group.
Finally, stage 5, transmit. And we must remember, transmission is inextricably locked to identity.
Hughes vividly describes how the cognitive virus recruited human vectors by wildly upgrading their moral identity.
On one side of the spectrum, people were posting selfies of their vaccine cards on social media.
Now, mechanically, what is happening there? It wasn't just sharing a neutral medical record. It was a highly visible moral identity badge.
It broadcasted to the tribe, I am moral, I am responsible, I believe in science, I am a good person.
Hughes notes how extreme this identity anchor became, citing instances of pundits on television outright saying the unvaccinated should be left to die, and miraculously framing that horrifying, callous sentiment as a deeply moral, virtuous stance.
And Hughes is equally, if not more, brutal about the other extreme of the spectrum. He talks extensively about the people who adamantly refused the vaccine, the ones who eventually started calling themselves purebloods.
Yeah, Hughes actually admits in the lecture that he personally fell into this camp for a time, and he bluntly says it manipulated the hell out of him.
He asks the audience, how did those people feel when they called themselves purebloods?
They felt vastly superior. They felt like they were the only ones who were truly awake to the Matrix. They felt strong and defiant.
Hughes calls that feeling total bull. It was just another viral illusion. Sharing their loud defiance felt protective, and it gave them a massive, intoxicating identity upgrade within their own specific tribe.
This raises a profoundly important question, and it's really the core insight of this entire historical case study.
Hughes argues that by the time we reach 2022, the global information war wasn't even tangentially about public health anymore.
It was entirely about psychological control, harvesting human fear for engagement, and branding absolute compliance to your specific tribe as the highest virtue.
But the ultimate takeaway for us is that the cognitive virus does not care about left or right. It doesn't care about conservative or liberal. It infected both sides with ruthless equal efficiency.
Hughes bluntly states that both sides got unbelievably stupid during this period.
Yeah, he says it felt like the entire world collectively lost 50 IQ points.
And when you understand the mechanics, you see exactly why the IQ dropped. Because all of their available cognitive energy was being siphoned off to frantically defend the virus.
It's an incredible, sobering analysis of how information operates at scale.
But it leaves us in a pretty dark place. If this cycle is so deeply ingrained in our evolutionary biology and so incredibly powerful that it can sweep up the entire globe and drop our collective intelligence, how on earth do we protect ourselves?
Right, because we can't just log off the internet forever and live in a cave.
We'd like to sometimes, but no. How do we build an intellectual firewall? This brings us to defensive maneuvers, how to actually disarm the virus.
This is where the lecture shifts from a terrifying diagnosis to an empowering treatment. As Hughes notes, knowing this 5-step loop intellectually is completely useless if your nervous system instantly freezes and goes into a fight-or-flight response the moment a charged idea attaches to you.
You need actionable, practical defense mechanisms to interrupt the loop in real time. First, we need rigorous self-diagnostics.
You have to train your ear and your body to recognize the virus trying to enter.
If you feel that sudden, hot surge of emotion, your heart rate spiking, your chest tightening, when reading a headline or talking to someone, you have to force a pause. You have to ask yourself, what exactly is this attaching to emotionally inside me?
Is it heating my fear of the future, my desperate need for belonging?
My desire to feel intellectually superior to that person over there. You start listening for the viral entry phrases like, people are too scared to talk about this, or finally someone is brave enough to say it.
Next, you have to look for the entry shortcut. Ask yourself, what heuristic shortcut just got used to bypass my guards?
Are they citing vague, unnamed authorities? Are they using artificial scarcity, like watch this video before the algorithm deletes it?
The key diagnostic tool here is realizing that your logical reasoning hasn't even started yet, but your agreement is already being heavily requested.
Then you check for replication. You ask, is this idea generating new thoughts for me? Is it suddenly conveniently explaining things in my past that I wasn't even thinking about yesterday?
And finally, for transmission, you have to ask the hardest question. What identity does sharing this give me?
If I retweet this, or if I repeat this at a dinner party, am I doing it to inform, or am I doing it to be enlightened or on the right side of history?
If an idea is offering you a shiny identity upgrade, Hughes warns that it's almost certainly a virus trying to use you as a vector.
Once you can successfully diagnose the infection, either taking hold in yourself or operating in a conversation with someone else, you can deploy disarmament techniques. The lecture provides some incredibly powerful verbal tools to diffuse the tension.
The first is what they call epistemic pulling out.
I love this one. And just to clarify the jargon, epistemic, which is just a fancy philosophical term for how we actually know what we know, means pulling out of the what and asking how.
Instead of jumping into the mud and arguing the facts of the controversial topic, you step entirely outside the frame of the argument.
You ask a meta question. You say, hey, before we decide if that specific claim is true, how would we even know?
Or you use the ultimate disarmament question. What kind of evidence would actually change your mind?
If their answer is essentially nothing, or if they get angry at the question, you know instantly that you aren't dealing with a rational, evidence-based belief. You are dealing with a fully defended cognitive virus. You can stop arguing because facts won't work.
Another fantastic epistemic tool for tense negotiations or even heated family arguments is asking, who gets to decide what counts as proof here?
It completely halts the viral replication process because it forces the host's brain to stop repeating the virus's talking points and start examining the underlying rules of the conversation itself. It wakes up the prefrontal cortex.
The second technique is called exposing the seal. This is where you gently, non-threateningly point out the trap the viral defense system has set.
Let's say you express mild doubt about your friend's new extreme worldview, and they immediately attack your character. Instead of getting defensive, you expose the seal.
You say, it sounds like my doubt is being described instead of actually explored.
Or, as Hughes suggests for a tense family reunion where someone brings up a wild conspiracy, you just casually observe, man, that idea seems to protect itself pretty aggressively.
That phrase is brilliant because it personifies the idea. It separates the aggressive idea from the person you are actually talking to.
You aren't attacking your uncle, you are observing the idea that has infected him, which leads directly to the most important, compassionate, defensive maneuver of all, identity separation.
You have to give the person, or yourself if you realize you're infected, explicit permission to detach from the idea without suffering a catastrophic loss of identity or social status.
Think of it like a friend wearing a heavy, immersive VR headset. The person is fully immersed in this terrifying, high-stakes viral world where everyone is an enemy and they are flailing around.
You don't scream at them that the digital dragon isn't real.
You just gently tap them on the shoulder and say, hey, you can take the goggles off for a second. The real world is still right here. You're safe and you're still you.
Hughes gives exact, practiced phrases for this separation. You can step back from this idea without throwing anything away.
Or, I get that you're incredibly passionate about this cause, but you don't owe your lifelong loyalty to a single idea.
My favorite phrase he suggests is, you can change your take without changing who you are. That is a psychological lifeline for someone drowning in an identity-bound meme.
It instantly diffuses the amygdala threat response. It communicates to their nervous system that they will not be cast out of the tribe, and they will not be seen as weak if they simply put the idea down.
That is just so deeply powerful. But it's not just about defense. We spent this entire deep dive looking at how destructive and manipulative this psychological machinery is.
But the machinery itself is just neurobiology. It's neutral. So now that we have the exact blueprint of the machine, can it be used for good? Let's look at the practical, positive applications of cognitive virology.
Exactly. The overarching rule for making any idea stick, whether it's a toxic virus or a highly beneficial habit, is that it must leave unfinished business in the mind.
It has to create a delayed replication mechanism so the person puts the final pieces together themselves.
When they connect the dots on their own, they take ownership of the idea. It becomes theirs.
So how do we use this in daily life? Let's look at parenting, which is essentially just trying to ethically install good memes into tiny humans.
Instead of just yelling a top-down rule at your kid, which triggers their defense mechanisms, you run the viral loop ethically.
First, attach. I know you're really frustrated that we have to leave the park, and I know this feels completely unfair. You validate the raw emotion.
Next, enter. Everybody has a hard time leaving when they're having fun. It's totally normal. You use the shortcut of normalizing it to bypass resistance.
Then replicate. So next time we have to leave, what do you think would make it easier for you? You don't give them the answer, you force their brain to generate the solution, creating that unfinished business.
Then you actively manage the defense stage by contextualizing their natural resistance.
Hmm.
I think it's totally normal to want to push back and be grumpy at first.
You aren't punishing their doubt or their frustration, you are integrating it, making it part of the accepted process.
And finally, transmit. Later on, you have the kid explain the new rule to their younger sibling. Hey, tell your brother what we do when it's time to leave the park.
The moment they teach it, the loop is closed, they get an identity upgrade as the big kid, and the positive idea is permanently installed.
It works beautifully in leadership, too, especially in a crisis environment. Hughes gives a hypothetical speech for a leader dealing with a panicked, anxious team.
The leader doesn't walk in with fake, toxic positivity. They start with attachment. Look, I know morale is low right now, and I know trust is incredibly thin. You acknowledge the uncomfortable truth.
Then replicate by surfacing the internal story everyone is already telling themselves. When things aren't clear, everybody compensates in their own way. They start making up worst-case scenarios, and that's where the friction on this team is coming from.
The leader then ethically reframes the discomfort handling the defense stage by saying, if part of you wants to push back on what I'm saying right now, that's completely normal and welcomed.
It disarms the rebellion by inviting it. And finally, they narrow the focus to just 3 clear priorities, cutting out the viral noise and giving the team a simple, actionable path forward.
It's a clean, highly effective use of the viral structure to calm a panicked group and build cohesion. You can even use this framework at awkward social events to break that awful performing loop we all get stuck in.
You know the exact feeling when everyone at a party or a networking event is just standing around, stiffly holding their drinks, trying desperately to look cool and successful.
You can actually identity hack the room. You just casually say out loud to the group, you know what, these parties always hit that weird point where everybody is just performing. I guarantee half the people here are running a mental checklist right now just to make sure they don't say anything too real or look weird.
By explicitly surfacing that hidden viral rule, you instantly give everyone a permission slip to stop pretending. The relief in the room is palpable.
And perhaps the most vital, life-changing application of all is monitoring your own self-talk. We run incredibly toxic negative viral loops on ourselves constantly.
The entry point is usually something like, this always happens to me.
The replication stage is your brain eagerly diving into your memory banks, pulling up a highlight reel of your past failures, and projecting a terrible, lonely future.
The defense stage is when a friend tries to cheer you up and you snap back, I'm not being negative, I'm just being realistic. You are defending the virus that is making you miserable.
But once you recognize that mechanical loop, you can stop infecting yourself with bad code. You can pause and ask yourself, what emotional receptor is this negative thought attaching to? Is it just my fear of rejection? You can pull the VR headset off your own eyes.
It's a complete paradigm shift for how you navigate your own mind and your own emotional landscape.
Which brings us to our outro. We have covered a truly massive amount of conceptual ground today.
We really have.
We started by understanding that ideas, memes, are the cultural equivalent of biological genes, blindly fighting for survival in the fertile garden of your mind.
We explored the terrifying 5-step loop of infection. Attach, enter, replicate, defend, and transmit.
We saw how this exact machinery operated at a sweeping global scale during the pandemic, indiscriminately dropping our collective intelligence and weaponizing our own doubt against us.
And finally, we learned how to diagnose and disarm these viruses, both in heated arguments and in our own heads, and how to use the framework to build better, more honest connections.
It is a staggering amount to process, but the beauty is that the practical application begins immediately. Once you see the matrix, you can't unsee it.
Exactly. So my challenge to you, the listener,
Yeah.
it's this. Pay incredibly close attention to your very next conversation.
Watch the evening news tonight with this framework in mind. Scroll through your social media feed for just 5 minutes.
And most importantly, check your own internal monologue. See if you can spot exactly where you are in the viral cycle.
Are you feeling that sudden, engineered, emotional attachment? Are you eating doubt to protect an idea you didn't even care about a month ago?
But before we leave you, there is one final, incredibly provocative, almost meta layer to this source material that we absolutely have to address.
It happens at the very end of Hughes's lecture. After spending an hour explaining how persuasion and viruses work, the speaker looks at the audience and says, you didn't have to agree with anything tonight. You didn't have to adopt a single belief.
He simply asks them to notice how things feel right now. suggesting that a cleaner, more aware expectation has quietly replaced a sloppier one. He even tells them it's totally normal if they feel an urge to explain this concept to someone else later.
He's literally calling out the transmission stage. He's predicting they will act as vectors.
Yes. And then the lecture ends with this bizarre, almost hypnotic spoken word poem. He talks rhythmically about a citywide manhunt underway, about the world breathing on sacred ground and a perfect promise.
It is pure, poetic, deliberately unresolved, unfinished business, which raises a staggering, mind-bending question for you to ponder.
Was the speaker intentionally leaving a puzzle in the audience's minds? Was this entire fascinating lecture about cognitive viruses actually designed as a benign cognitive virus itself?
Was it perfectly, meticulously structured to attach to your curiosity, enter your mind, and replicate in your thoughts long after the video ended?
It's the ultimate Trojan horse.
You log off thinking you just learned how to spot the virus, but you have to ask yourself, have you just been willingly, beautifully infected by a completely new way of seeing the world? Keep an eye out for those jagged white lines in the murky waters of your own mind. Until next time.